program is the active center.
You've heard it, right? In a political debate, maybe online, the argument that because a country has a military or public services, it's somehow socialist. It's a claim that gets tossed around a lot, and honestly, it just muddies the waters. So today, let's untangle this whole thing. So let's just ask the question, point blank. Is the United States, with all its government programs, secretly a socialist country? I know, it's a loaded question. But to get a real answer, we've got to look past the labels and see how the system actually works. You know the argument. It usually goes something like this. The thinking is, hey, if the government pays for it, whether it's the army, the local police, or Medicare, that's socialism. But is it really that simple? Let's break it down. Okay, the first and, you could argue, the most important place to start is to just follow the money. I mean, to really get any economic system, you have to ask the big question. Where is the wealth that pays for all this stuff actually coming from? And right away, you see a difference that is just night and day. In the U.S. model, public services get paid for by taxing the wealth that's created by private people and private companies. But in a command economy, there's no private sector to tax. The state just takes the resources directly, because it already owns and controls everything from the get-go. And that right there is the key. Think about it. Programs like Medicare or the military totally depend on a healthy, booming private sector to create the money in the first place. They are downstream from it. A command economy's goal is the total opposite. It wants to get rid of the private sector entirely. So that brings us to our next big point of comparison, and this one really gets to the heart of classic economics. It's the huge difference between providing a public service and owning the entire country's ability to produce things. Now, before we go any further, we have to get this term straight. The means of production. This isn't just some boring jargon. It is the absolute centerpiece of socialist theory. We're talking about the actual stuff that creates value in an economy. The factories, the machines, the land, the capital. The question of who owns these, well, that's what defines the whole system. And when you use that definition, the contrast is just, wow. In the U.S., who owns the factories making our phones and cars? Private companies. Who owns the farms that grow our food? Private citizens. But in a true command economy, the state owns it all. It's not a small difference. It's a complete 100% transfer of ownership. Here's how that actually plays out. The U.S. government provides what economists call public goods, services like a fire department that helps society run smoothly. But, and this is the key, it doesn't own the company that builds the fire trucks. Or look at defense. The government is a huge customer. It buys fighter jets from a private company like Boeing. It doesn't own the factories that make them. All right, so we've covered where the money comes from and who owns the tools. The last piece of the puzzle is all about control. Who's actually calling the shots and making the big economic decisions? And again, we're looking at two completely different worlds here. On one side, you've got a democratic process. We vote for people who then debate and decide how much to spend on stuff. But on the other side, you've got a small group of central planners who dictate absolutely everything. What you make, what it costs, and even where you work. Things like supply and demand, gone. So you see, there's this massive, massive gap between a government funding a service through a democratic vote and a government mandating every single aspect of economic life from the top down. One is a policy choice. The other is total control. Okay, let's pull all of these threads together now and put them side by side. This is where you can really see just how different these two systems truly are. Just look at this. Funding, taxes from private wealth versus state appropriation. Ownership, private versus state. Labor, a competitive market where you pick your job versus the state telling you where to work. And the political system, democracy versus central planning. When you lay it all out like this, it's so clear. These systems aren't just a little different. They're built on completely opposite ideas. So if the U.S. isn't a command economy, what do we call it? Well, the term is a mixed economy. And yeah, it's a blend, but here's the most important part of that definition. The foundation is private property and the free market. And this right here is the best way to picture it. Think of a mixed economy like a building. The massive foundation holding everything up, that's the private sector. The public services are like the floors and rooms built on top of that foundation. In a command economy, the state just bulldozes that private foundation and tries to be the foundation. It's a totally different building from the ground up. So it seems pretty clear there's a world of difference between funding a fire department and the state owning every factory. And that brings us to one final, bigger question to think about. How much does the language we use, the labels we throw around, really shape our ability to have smart, honest debates about the economy we want?